All right, excellent. So welcome, folks. It is 2 o'clock on the dot. We have about 50 people registered for today, so folks are slowly rolling in, but that's all right. I want to go ahead and get us started again to be respectful of everybody's time. So I am going to share my screen and we are going to jump into today's presentation. And we are going to uh, delve into a lot of really interesting assistive technology solutions. All right, so let me hide that and get us started from the beginning. Okay, great. So thank you all for being here. And again, like I said, folks are going to be rolling in through today's session. But I do want to get started because we only have an hour. But we are focusing on assistive technology for emotional and behavioral disorders. So, ways that we can support individuals who have EBD. And although the focus of today's session is around students, a lot of these solutions can be applied in many areas. So, it can be applied in employment, community living, and of course, within schools. So, a couple quick housekeeping things before I get into the heart of the presentation today. We do have live captions provided. You can use the caption button at the bottom of your screen to actually toggle them on and off. You can also change the primary language that you're seeing. So I'm speaking in English, but if you want to get your captions in a different language, you can choose that when you turn your captions on. And lastly, I'm going to ask that folks wait till the end of today's session to post questions in the Q&A section. So there's a Q&A box. You can put your questions there, and then I can answer them at the end of the session. Because I'm doing the presenting and I'm sharing the screen, I can't see those questions pop up while I'm talking. So again, put them in the Q&A and I can answer them at the end. Just keep in mind, I am recording today's session, so you may not want to put anything that's sort of personally identifying, but absolutely post your questions there. And if there's something I can help with offline, that's also an option. And I'll share all my contact information at the end of today's session. So, just a little bit about me. I am the director of the Maryland AT program. My name is Lori. I have worked in the assistive technology field for over 20 years. I have a BA, an MFA, postgrad certification in assistive technology, and I'm currently completing a second master's in special education applied behavior analysis. And it's through those classes and the clients that we serve that this presentation sort of created itself based on questions that we've gotten, clients we've worked with, and then just sort of the area I've been focusing on. And I am the parent of 3 kids, 2 of whom are neurodiverse. And so some of these solutions that I'm going to talk about today are tried and true. But, the great thing about assistive technology is, there's no one size fits all. And so when we're talking about AT ideas, for behaviors or for certain needs. It really is it's a very individualized experience and approach. And very briefly about the Maryland AT program. So we are the statewide assistive technology program providing services across the state to folks of all ages and all disabilities. We have AT libraries, we host trainings. Folks can come in, access devices, have consultations, borrow equipment, have access to reused devices, have access to 3D printed equipment. So we do a lot of different things in this realm. And certainly, again, we can kind of talk more about that in the Q&A section and delve into some of the additional services and how we as the AT program can provide assistance to individuals. Our objectives for today. We're talking about assistive technology for emotional behavioral disorders. So we're going to kind of capture what that definition is, what those characteristics are of EBD, prevalence of EBD, some supports and interventions, specific tools to help improve behavior, and then a brief wrap up. And it's in that wrap up that we'll have our Q&A time as well. So I'd like to start with this notion that behavior is a form of communication. Behavior is always telling us something. And so with that mindset, we can start to dig into better understanding types of behavior. We can use this notion that behavior is a form of communication to really start to support individuals, whether it's through an accommodation, through an assistive technology tool, through some other intervention that's going to help somebody convey what they need to convey in a way that we can understand. So the definition of emotional behavioral disorders, I'm going to refer to them as EBD. So that's kind of, you'll hear me say that throughout today's session. But emotional behavioral disorders refer to a range of mental health conditions, and it can impact a child's ability to learn and interact socially. And again, I'm saying child here, but it really is anybody. So although some of today's session will focus on school supports, it really does apply to anybody, whether they're in school or out of school. And these disorders can manifest as anxiousness, depression, aggression, withdrawal, and all of those can lead to academic challenges and social difficulties. And that's where we want to think about ways that assistive technology can help, with some of these characteristics. Specific emotional and behavioral disorders. So this is a general list. And I'm going to talk about a little bit further about ADHD, but some that fall under this umbrella of EBDs include anxiety, bipolar, conduct disorder, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, sometimes called OCD, psychotic disorder, oppositional defiance disorder, and ADHD. So what I want to say about ADHD is that some mental health professionals do include ADHD as an emotional behavioral disorder. Others don't, but that they recognize there are certain symptoms and characteristics of ADHD that are really consistent with emotional behavioral disorders. So just kind of keep that in mind. You can certainly be working with someone that doesn't have a set diagnosis, but they have some of these characteristics, and that's fine. What we want to do is we want to find solutions that help with some of these things that folks are experiencing, whether or not there is a diagnosis in place. So characteristics of EBD. This is broad and there can be more, but here are some, including hyperactivity. So that can be that short attention span and impulsiveness, difficulties with concentration, following directions, or engaging in cooperative learning. Those are two very specific characteristics in ADHD, whether it's the hyperactive form or the inattentive form. So again, maybe not considered a social or an emotional behavioral disorder, but certainly those characteristics exist. Aggression, self-injurious behavior, withdrawal, so not interacting socially with others, excessive fear, excessive anxieties, immaturity. So that can be, moments where there's sort of temper tantrums, poor coping skills, things like that, things that you would think, somebody shouldn't be doing this at this point, or, I don't understand why they're having this really large emotional response to something that doesn't generally elicit that. Learning difficulties, so that can be part of an EBD. And then children with the most serious emotional disturbances can, and again, I'm saying children, but this could be anybody, exhibiting distorted thinking, excessive anxiety, unusual motor acts, and mood swings. Again, these are characteristics. This is not all encompassing, but these are some characteristics that we might see with emotional behavioral disorder diagnoses, or these could be standalone characteristics that we're noticing with someone and we want to help address those. So the prevalence and the impact on students. Research has shown there's about 1 in 10 children experiencing emotional behavioral disorders. These can not only hinder academic performance, but also pretty profoundly impact social skills, relationships with peers, and relationships with educators. And we are going to talk a little bit about some assistive technology solutions that can help with building social skills. But keep that in mind, 1 in 10, that's a pretty significant number. And there are solutions out there that can help build better skills and skill sets. And according to the CDC, approximately 8.3 million children between the ages of 4 and 17 have parents who have talked to a healthcare provider or school staff about a child's emotional behavioral difficulties. So that's, it's a very real number. It's a very real thing. And again, even if there isn't a diagnosis to go along with those characteristics or those behaviors, it doesn't mean that those behaviors don't deserve the attention, the time, and the commitment to really address them and find ways to improve or change those behaviors. And then nearly 2.9 million children have been prescribed medication for difficulties. So we know that there is a need out there, and there are people working on trying to support kids or support individuals who are experiencing these behaviors. And we want to help, with a piece of that being assistive technology. And emotional behavioral disorders are considered high incidence disabilities. So when we're talking about disabilities, there's high incidence and low incidence. High incidence being those disabilities that are most common. So emotional behavioral disorders are common in the scope of types of disabilities. So certainly this is something that we will experience in the classroom, we will experience in the workplace, we will experience with young adults in community living or in higher ed. It is something that is common, and these are some tools that we want to look at today that are going to help folks with a range of those characteristics. So what does emotional behavioral disorders look like? What can it look like? Again, this is not all encompassing, but I liked this little graphic. So signs of emotional dysregulation. Again, these are going to be behaviors or things that can help us better identify that there is an emotional or behavioral disorder. Overly intense emotions, impulsive behavior, lack of emotional awareness, trouble making decisions, an inability to manage behavior, and avoiding difficult emotions. So those can be signs of dysregulation when someone's in the moment experiencing those things. And when they're in that moment, what can we do to support them? And again, we're going to get to assistive technology, but I want to talk about some of the ways we can just support individuals broadly, especially in those moments of dysregulation. Because most of the time, when you have an emotional behavioral disorder, you're not living in constant dysregulation, but you are experiencing that dysregulation. So first, if we are working with someone who is experiencing that, we need to make sure we're sort of regulating our own emotions. We're not getting extremely angry or extremely frustrated or extremely overwhelmed, or at least we're not showing that at the moment. And then working with that person in that moment to sort of kind of come to a space where we can both be like, okay, we're going to work through this. We can use visual reminders. We can use verbal reminders. We can provide choices. So in that moment of dysregulation, providing some choices, maybe 2, 3 tops of what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that we can do or do you want to do to kind of move through this moment. We can ask about the needs. So again, when that person is in that moment of dysregulation, really kind of saying, how can I help you? What can I do to support you right in this moment? You know, we don't need to talk about the before and the after necessarily, but in this moment, what can we do? And then eventually help that person figure out how to self-regulate. And again, we're going to look at some assistive technology that can offer those visual reminders, those verbal, or even other types of reminders, choices, and tools for self-regulation. So we're going to look at assistive technology that can help with these points, but this is a good way to start. Again, when you're working with somebody who's in that moment of dysregulation, really trying to make sure you're level, that you're regulated, and then walking through some choices. The importance of support and interventions. Timely intervention and support is crucial, especially for students who have EBDs. If you are stepping in early on and you're able to provide supports, that will lead to improved academic performance and improved social skills. So if that child is starting to get what they need, and the supports that they need to regulate, to convey their wants, their desires, and we're supporting them through that process, they will do better in school. They will feel better supported by folks who are in who might be authority figures, but also from their peers. And support can look like a lot of things. It can be counseling, it can be cognitive behavior counseling, it can be behavioral modification techniques. Parent training is a big piece of that, and assistive technology. And all of those together can foster some positive outcomes for individuals. And then there are some additional tools that can be used. So in the school space, we can talk about setting up an IEP. If the student isn't necessarily academically behind, but they need some additional support because of their EBD, that could be a 504 plan. So I'm going to say IEPs, but we can also say 504s as an accommodation. Functional behavior assessments can be key. That's where there is an opportunity to work with a specialist to really evaluate what is going on and figure out what the genesis of those behaviors are so that we can then come up with a plan, which is the behavior intervention plan, to sort of change unwanted behaviors, reinforce the positive, and change the troubled or the behaviors that are causing trouble. All of that leads to building sort of a substrate of support, essentially, for an individual. So the functional behavior assessment, or an FBA, is really the process for identifying the reasons behind or factors contributing to a student's behavior. Again, I'm using the word student, but functional behavior assessments are provided outside of the school system as well. So if you're working with an adult with disabilities, they can still have a functional behavior assessment. This can be provided at any point in time, but it's really that exploratory time to figure out what is the reason behind a behavior. In applied behavior analysis, there are four basic functions that cause behaviors. That's sensory stimulation, escape, so wanting to get away from something, a need for attention, or an access to tangibles, so wanting something. And again, that goes back to that idea that behavior is a form of communication. With all of these behaviors are telling us something. They are telling us a want or a need of that individual. And so that's where you use your functional behavior assessment to figure out, what are the reasons behind those behaviors. And then you can start to move to the next step, which is the behavior intervention plan. And that is where you're coming up with strategies to, reward the positive behaviors and reduce the problem behaviors. And so a behavior intervention plan has what are called the SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timeframes. And that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about emotional behavioral disorders and assistive technology interventions. Having a device, having an app is not necessarily going to instantly change a behavior, but it is a tool, and it is a tool that, as it's used more and more frequently, will help to establish that, that change that we want to see. So behavior intervention plans can be great in that next step. And then talking about accommodations in the classroom or accommodations, period. These don't necessarily have to be in the classroom, but these are accommodations that can really help with dysregulation. So we can talk about preferential seating. So making sure someone is sitting somewhere that is most beneficial to them. That could be close to the teacher, it could be close to the door, close to a restroom, whatever it might be. But that preferential seating can be really helpful in sort of kind of taking that first step and making sure that we're right there as dysregulation might occur. Offering frequent breaks, offering extended time to get assignments done, to get things done. Adjustments for sensitivities that can include adjustments to lighting, to temperature, to noise. And then access to sensory toys and tools that can be fidget devices. It can be different types of seating, but some accommodations can be really helpful just to kind of provide some potential offsets again to that dysregulation. And one thing that I cannot stress enough when supporting someone with an emotional behavioral disorder is routine is really essential. Routine is great for everybody anyway, but routine is really, really essential when you have someone who can be easily sort of triggered or moved into dysregulation by offering routine as often as possible and making sure you're sticking to routine and supporting those folks through transitions. That's going to be vital and sort of creating that that stabilization that you want um, as you're supporting somebody. So let's talk a little bit about assistive technology and how it might help. So AT can really be any device or software designed to aid someone with a disability in their daily living tasks. It can be something that's mainstream. So we could be using reminders in an iPhone that's not necessarily created to be assistive technology, but it can serve as an assistive device, or it can be something very dedicated, like a dedicated communication device. Assistive technology really runs this gamut. And for students with EBD, these tools can foster some independence. They can help with self-regulation and ultimately help with in improving those learning outcomes. And students with EBD might also need some academic supports to be successful. And AT can help with those academic or educational goals as well as those emotional goals. So if the student has an IEP, an individualized education program, you can include assistive technology in that IEP. The IEP will need to demonstrate that assistive technology can support the educational goals, and you want to describe how it will contribute to those educational goals because the IEP is really around educational goals. The behavior intervention plan is around behaviors, but the IEP is around educational goals. And AT can be documented in virtually every section of the IEP. And it is best practice to write in the features of the assistive technology rather than any device names. So as we're looking at different types of assistive technology and you're thinking about how that might work for a student or a loved one, if the idea is to ultimately get that written into the IEP, what you really want to focus on are what are the features of this device or this app that's going to help this person that I'm supporting rather than this particular app is the thing that I need. So it's really about what are the features. And types of assistive technology will look at toys, communication devices, biofeedback reminders, tools for emotional regulation, social skills, organization, and reading and writing. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of these. And let me go back to that. What I wanted to note on this slide is implement with a plan. So that's really important when we're talking about assistive technology and we're talking about using that and incorporating it into the IEP or the behavior intervention plan. Again, we want to implement these with a plan. We want to think about how is this going to support this person and what are the outcomes that we're looking for. So really kind of have a framework for how you want to implement and how you want to measure the outcomes. In the educational space, we use what is called the SET framework. SET stands for Student, Environment, Task, and Tools. This framework can be applied outside of school as well. So it can be really the person, the environment, the task, and the tool. And what that does is it really makes you think about what is the individual? What are those individual needs, their strengths, their weaknesses? What is that individual first experiencing? Where do they want to use or potentially use assistive technology? What does that environment look like? Is it going to be in school? Is it going to be at work? Is it going to be at home? Is it going to be all of those? Then we want to think about the tasks that that person needs to accomplish. And lastly, then we want to think about the tools. So what are the assistive technologies that can help? And we want to start usually with lower to no tech. That's like the really, really easy off the shelf items, and then kind of work our way up from there. So low tech to mid tech to high tech. And we use this framework when we're meeting with our clients to explore different technology solutions. So the SET framework, again, is used in the school system, but it is by and large sort of a framework to be used across the board for anyone when we're thinking about assistive technology. And it's always that person first, so student, then the environment, the tasks that they want to accomplish, or sometimes in this case, like those behavioral characteristics that we want to sort of help them with, and then the tools. So what we're going to do is we're going to dig into some assistive technology solutions, and this is not an exhaustive list. There are lots of ideas out there, so this is just sort of a compilation. Again, we can use the Q&A at the end of today's session, but we can also talk offline at a later point if there are questions or ideas that you want to explore. So some toys are what we call recreational assistive technology. There's lots of solutions out there. There are emotional representation toys. I know I used to have something for one of my kids called a Komochi, which was like a little stuffed animal and it had a little pocket in the front. And then there were faces or like smaller stuffed faces that had, different expressions, mad, sad, angry, tired, all of these different range of emotions. And you could choose the ones that you're feeling and put them into the Komochi pocket. So I don't have stock in Komochis. I don't even know if they're available anymore, but they were one that we use. But there are all kinds out there. So you can do a quick search on Amazon or just a Google search and find a variety of sort of emotional representation stuffed toys. They can be great for younger kids who are just trying to identify what their emotions are. And not only are they feeling those emotions, but being able to take those feelings and show some representation with them. Fidget toys, sensory items, these you can get at the dollar store, but there's all kinds, as well as like weighted pillows, weighted toys, stuffed toys. There are lots of activity games around feelings and building awareness of what those feelings are. And then sometimes just having something sort of more kinesthetic can be great. So hammocks, swings, tents, something that allows that person to sort of move around or get comfort in like a hammock or a big swing. Those can be great for folks who have EBD, and those can really help in those moments of dysregulation, just having something that helps in that moment. So again, toys are really basic. These are essentially what we're calling our no tech or low tech solutions. But then there's also communication devices. So behavior can stem from the inability to express oneself. By and large, behavior is a form of communication. So if somebody cannot communicate what they're feeling, whether they're nonverbal, maybe they've experienced, selective mutism, something along those lines. Communication devices are really the first step to helping that person. Now, there's all kinds. There are very simple, like 1 and 2 button communication devices. There are pictures. So, somebody can wear like a necklace that just has a variety of like pictures on it that they can show, all the way up to higher tech solutions like what's on the screen here, with apps that are far more robust, like Proloquo Go, GoTalk, LAMP. These are all different types of communication devices. If you are interested in exploring communication devices, certainly you can reach out to our program to kind of get a variety, see a variety of the very low tech options all the way up to the higher tech ones. But it's really helpful for folks who are nonverbal to first get that evaluation through a speech language pathologist. So if you're working with someone who has a lot of big behaviors, a lot of big emotions, and they are nonverbal, the very first step to take is to really get that evaluation for communication, because we want to give that person an opportunity to start to convey what they're feeling, whether it's through picture, symbols, or typing. Self-monitoring, that has a strong evidence base regarding educating students with EBD, and teachers, educators can use technology to both monitor and provide real-time feedback, and they can send updates on student behavior. So some of the ones that we have seen in use include Class Dojo, Talking Points, and Blooms. Those tend to be run by the teacher. That provides instant reinforcement, sometimes little reward coins. It can be an opportunity for the teacher to sort of share immediate information with caregivers, with families. Um, Behavior Tracker Pro is another one that's really behavior focused. But all of these include elements of behavior, and it becomes an opportunity for that sort of real time connection between the teachers, the parents, and even the student. And then you can start to build in positive behavior and real time feedback. So those can be really helpful for certain students. Some of these also allow the student to have some access to that information, and you can also use these to track trends. So if you're using it and you're seeing that on certain days or certain times of the day, there's a spike in problem behavior, that gives you that sort of visual cue to say, okay, what's going on at this time or on this day, to really dig into better understanding what's causing those behaviors. Then there's behavior support and self-regulation ATs. So that can be like wrist counters, golf counters, beads in the pocket, behavior charts, and vision boards to track goals. Visual and speech prompting devices or apps. There's, sort of like task sequencing apps that can help with, getting into the classroom. You need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the classroom in the morning. That sort of visual task sequencing can be really beneficial for some folks. Again, it's no one size fits all. So it's really a matter of digging into understanding the motivation of the student or the individual, using that set framework, and then figuring out what's going to really support them in the environment with the tasks that they're having some trouble with. So visual schedules can be great, and you can also use self-reporting as an option. Visual schedules can be particularly helpful, especially with younger kids. They're great. You see them in most classrooms anyway, but for some kids, having them on their desk or in their desk can be great and useful. That helps them kind of have a visual set of like, this is what I need to do and when. And self-regulation reporting can be really helpful. So that can be any number of things. I'm going to talk about another tool in a few minutes, but I have seen individuals set up Google Forms. So at the end of a class, a student can go in and fill out their reporting form, just to kind of say how they felt like they did, what was difficult, moments that they felt really challenged. Um, and it can be as simple as just giving them an opportunity to report on that day, that class, that space. Then there's lots of tools for emotional regulation and sort of self-management. There are mindfulness and relaxation apps. So some are very, very popular, and you've probably heard of some of these. They include Headspace, Calm, Mindshift. These are great. They can help with anxiety, kind of understanding your anger, managing your anger, sort of addressing that emotional dysregulation in that moment. There are also mood tracking apps, Dailyo, Mood Tracker. Again, being able to track those moods can be very helpful because then you can also start to figure out where those trends are for those moments of dysregulation or the triggers. And then you can start to build out strategies around it. And digital journals can be excellent. Journey and Penzu are two that we've heard of that folks have successfully used. But that's like very private. It's a digital place to journal. And again, the opportunity to just sort of write out and work through those feelings can be great. These are all apps though. So kind of keep in mind, what is the environment that you're working in with the person you're supporting? Do they have access to an iDevice during the day? Are they allowed to have access to an iDevice? So those may be some challenges to think through. And again, that could be a piece of that IEP if you decide that using something like a mood tracking app or a mindfulness app would be beneficial to that student, making sure that's added into the IEP and tied to the educational goals so that they can have access to a device that they need. Behavioral reinforcement and motivation. There's first gaming platforms like Kahoot and Classcraft. Those are games where students can, participate in actual educational games, but also behavior management. Those include earning points or rewards, and then they can use those to earn more things. So that's always fun. That's one option. Then there's also self-monitoring. Like I mentioned, that Google form, super kind of low tech, easy to set up. There are interventions like check-in, check-out. That can be as simple as like just a verbal interaction with the student. But it can also be something more complex. Panorama is one tool that is a far more complex tool, but it really does provide data around each student and the moments that they're doing well, those moments that they're having that dysregulation. So there's lots of different opportunities. Some schools use kind of like school-wide reinforcement where, students earn points in classes for participation, for good behavior, and then they can turn those points in for like school gear. Sometimes teachers will use it on a sort of more micro level. So that's another option as well. It can be used in the classroom to create incentives, and not all incentives are they're not all the same for students. So some students might be motivated to get a pizza party. Some students might be motivated just to earn time to have their phone out and their AirPods in for the last 15 minutes of class. So it really, again, depends. That one no size fits all concept applies. So tools for focus and attention. There's different concentration apps like Focus at Will and Stay Focused. They do help promote sustained attention. There are also Google extensions that can be used. You can turn on those Google extensions. So if you're using Chromebooks in the classroom and sort of a Google-based system, you can turn on different Google extensions to simplify content, to limit ads and limit distractions that pop up on web pages. So lots of ideas around that just to kind of help curb distractions. Noise canceling headphones and earbuds can be great for some students. It helps create that calm, quiet environment. Some students need that a lot. So again, kind of thinking about who is that student? How might they use this device? So again, thinking about that environment and those fidget or sensory tools like the fidget spinners, Tangle toys, even chew necklaces. they can all be really helpful for stress relief. So lots of solutions out there. Behavioral and social skills. There's lots of social stories apps. Model Me Going Places and Social Stories are two that are quite popular. That can help students understand social expectations and they can practice those social interactions. Those are really vital to building those relationships with peers and then also with their teachers, the authority figures of the school, or when they go out into the real world and they start to work. So those can be really vital to building those skills that we want them to have that sometimes we think students or individuals should have intrinsically, but particularly with folks who have emotional and behavioral disorders, they're not there. They're just sort of muddled with all these other big feelings. So using those apps can be incredibly helpful. There are also video modeling tools, eye modeling and video self-modeling, which is a type of intervention that allows students to watch videos of appropriate behavior. And that is really good for sort of building an understanding, like kind of concrete understanding of how to behave in certain situations. And that can lead to improved safety for folks as well. And then emotional regulation apps include the zones of regulation, breathe, think, do. Again, this is to help them recognize the emotions they're feeling, manage them in those moments, identify coping strategies, and then practicing mindfulness techniques. It's really a form of psychology to help build the skills that we want these individuals to have when when we see them struggling, we want to help them get to a point where they're not going to struggle through it. Biofeedback is actually another really interesting area. So when I talk about biofeedback, it's usually vibrational feedback. Watchminder has two different types of watches, one that looks like a smartwatch, one that looks like a more traditional digital watch. But these are programmable. They have alarms, they have program messages, but they're not speaking out loud. They're providing vibrational feedback. So you can use biofeedback to help students with staying on task. You can set it to stay on task. You can set it to get that little vibrational reminder that it's time to take meds or it's time to head off to lunch or whatever it might be. Motivator is kind of a similar concept. It's a kind of looks like a beeper. It provides vibrational feedback based on the what you've programmed into it. Another great tool. These are both ones that don't stand out. So it's kind of low key, like nobody really notices, but they can just provide enough little bit of reminder that then that person doesn't need someone telling them certain things all day long. Talk light is another cool concept. It's a light that flashes according to the noise level in the room. So having something like that helps with self-monitoring, especially if you have somebody who's really sensitive to noise, or who may not realize that they're getting loud. And so having that visual reminder, like, oh, I'm being really loud, I'm being really intense right now, that might help. And then, of course, music players can promote calm and focus. So time management and organization, this is always a big area of need. Students with emotional behavioral disorders can frequently struggle with staying on task, managing their time. We certainly see those characteristics in ADHD, but lots of others as well. So Google Keep, the Todoist is an app. My Study Life, again, just kind of depending on the age of the person, what they have access to in their environment during the day, what we want them to, like what goals we have set for them, can really determine what type of task management app is going to work. But they can be great tools just to kind of provide those reminders, help with organization. And then there are other apps like Time Timer or Alarmed. Time Timer is an app, but it's also a very physical device as well. So some folks have them in their classrooms. We have them here in our library. It's a visual of how time kind of changes. So that's a really helpful tool, but that Time Timer app can be used. I used to participate in a session that would be online, and the teacher would actually use a timer app on the screen when she was giving independent work, and we could kind of see the time decrease visually. So not just numbers changing, but an actual visual representation of time decreasing. Those can all be helpful. And then visual schedules, visual routines. Visual Schedule is an app that can be used. It can help with prompting. It can help with transitions. It can help with staying focused on task. So again, it really comes down to what are the needs of the student or the individual? What are they trying to accomplish? And then we can figure out what apps might be out there that are going to help them with all of these things. Support for writing and academic success is another big area. So certainly we want to support all of those emotional behavioral pieces, but along with that comes sort of those educational challenges. So again, as like something like speech to text, you can talk right into your text messages, you can talk into your notes, or you can talk into your computer to write a document, send an email. Sometimes something as simple as that can be really helpful for somebody, especially in moments of dysregulation, if they can just pull out their phone and talk into it like they're journaling, right? So there are lots of opportunities there to explore ways to support somebody. And then certainly graphic organizers are great in the classroom. Inspiration, Kidspiration, there's a wide variety of them. They're great for sort of helping folks who might have anxiety with getting started on work, who might kind of not know how to get started or where to get started. But again, we see that characteristic with ADHD a lot. So having graphic organizers can really help with kind of getting into an assignment or getting into a task at hand. And supporting transitions and flexibility, that's always key. Again, I mentioned time timer. So what's on the screen is an actual time timer device, and you can see how, somebody starts with an amount of time and then the visual representation decreases. You can have apps that do that. You can have a physical device that does that, but it does provide sort of that structure, that predictability, that ability to sort of watch and have a clear sense of what's left when we're talking about time. Interactive smart boards, tablets, they're all helpful. They can be appealing, motivating for students, and they can be very engaging. So having sort of ways for students to interact with the content, with the tasks at hand, and having multiple ways for them to interact with it can also help with choice and just sort of regulation. One thing I really like to talk about is using evidence-based practices to inform interventions. ESA, or Every Student Succeeds, and IDEA both require teachers to use academic and behavioral practices and programs grounded in scientifically based research. And when we're talking about emotional behavioral, when we're talking about evidence-based practices, we can really think about the students, the setting, the resources, and the evidence level. So in this presentation, I do have two links, great sources for current evidence-based practices. You can find lots of research around tools that support individuals with a variety of disabilities, including emotional behavioral. I've done a lot of research around tools to support individuals with ADHD. So there's a lot out there. There's lots of research. And sometimes it's a matter of just sort of figuring out where to go to get that research so you know what's going to work best for the person you're supporting. So when I share this slide deck, I will share, you will have access to these links as well, so you can do a little bit of research on your own if you're interested. And final thoughts, we have about 10 minutes left in today's session, and I do want to make sure we have time for Q&A. But final thoughts, assistive technology can be incredibly valuable for students. It helps them with managing emotions, staying focused, engaging, building social skills, building organization, building, what is needed for self-regulation. So, as we work with individuals who have emotional behavioral disorders, we want to think about what works best for them. And that really does come down to exploring solutions and trying out different things, knowing that it may not work instantly, but it's a tool to help somebody get to where we want them to better manage their emotions, manage their behaviors. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and go to the Q&A. Great. Okay. So there is a question in there now. It says, these solutions sound great. I'm wondering if they are all covered under the DDA assisted technology, and if so, what funding stream specifically, and how might we ensure these tools and solutions are included in a person's PCP? That's a great question. So usually in the PCP, you're identifying goals. It could be work goals, community living goals. If you can identify the assistive technology that's going to work for them, you can write that AT into the PCP, or, what you're looking for in terms of the AT that's going to support that person. And you have to tie it directly to those goals. So in theory, yes, it would be it's assistive technology, so it would be considered AT. Sometimes there's pushback from DDA. That is something we, help navigate and coordinate a lot. So if that were to happen, you had a tool written in, you had an app, or you had a device written in to the PCP, and DDA did not accept it, you can always reach out to us and we can help sort of work with DDA to make sure that it's tied to the goals that it needs to be tied to. That usually involves folks from DDA, also the provider organization or the provider agency, the CCS, and the family. But yes, it should be covered, but sometimes there are challenges. Any other questions? All right. It doesn't look like it. What I am going to do right now. Oh, I'm sorry. How would I know which tool without an, is that without an answer or is that without an assessment? I'm not 100% sure I understand that question. Um, if you're interested in exploring these solutions, any of these solutions, you can reach out to us. So we are AT professionals without an assessment. Okay, perfect. You don't always have to have an assessment for some assistive technology solutions. We can start through the Maryland TAP program by providing a consultation, and that's where we're going to use that SET framework, whether they're a student or not a student. But we can walk through that consultation process, identify some tools. Now, we don't have every single app that I featured here today, but we do have a lot of these tools. So we can walk through some of them. We can talk about different ideas for higher cost assistive technology, especially if you're going through DDA, you do need an assessment. But even in the school system, you don't always need an assessment to know that an assistive technology device is going to work. Some of the more complex things like communication devices, they do require an assessment through it with a speech language pathologist. But again, our role is to kind of help you through that process. So if you are interested in exploring something to see if it's going to work, you can just reach out to us. We serve, again, all ages, all disabilities. We are a free service through the state. So you can connect with us and we can kind of walk you through some ideas, some solutions, try them out and see what's going to, what works, or at least what feels comfortable for that individual, and then they can start to implement it more regularly into the work that they're doing. And I am going to quickly put into the chat my email address so that folks can reach out if they have specific questions. There we go. So folks can reach out. If you have questions, please connect. If you're interested in exploring AT solutions, reach out to us. We are happy to schedule an appointment either virtually or in person, and we can, start thinking about what's going to help the person that you're supporting. So it does not look like there are any other questions. So with that, I'm going to end today's session. I want to thank you all for attending. And again, please reach out.